So I'm going to talk about my first day at ForKids. I came to ForKids 16 years ago. And my first day, I showed up at Haven House. And our administrative offices were in the third floor of the shelter. In a little attic room. It was a little different back then. And that's where I showed up for work. I was about 3 months out of my corporate job. And life was changing. And that was a big change. And everyone that knew me was a little perplexed by that, particularly my parents, who had paid for a whole lot of years of my education, and had never once heard me mention the words helping the homeless in my very detailed career track. They really hadn't heard me mention the words helping anyone as I planned my career. All roads on my career path were leading to me becoming fabulously wealthy. So on that first day when I showed up, I met with Liz Brickhouse, who was the executive director of ForKids at the time. And our plan was to spend the day orienting me to my new world. And it was definitely a new world. And my old job, which was at Arthur Andersen in Washington, D.C., just to give you a sense of my old world. When I traveled for my old job, I stayed at the Ritz. When I mentioned going to a conference when I came to ForKids, Liz said, "Oh, that's a good idea. Yes, you'll need to apply for a scholarship and we'll network with some of the churches and see if someone can put you up in a spare bedroom in Philadelphia." I think I bought a book on the topic instead of coin. So, at any rate, on that first day, we spent some time, got going, training me on what I would need to know. And after about an hour, we got a call. Liz got a call from a contractor down at Morgan Place. And Morgan Place was our new transitional housing program, which was just about ready to open. And he had problems with a client down there at the time. Her name was Pat. She was giving him some trouble. So Liz gave a little advice, and she hung up. We kept going. Over the next couple hours, we kept getting calls about this problem client named Pat, who was causing everybody problems. After about probably the 4th or 5th call, Liz felt compelled to explain. Pat was supposed to move into her unit down at Morgan Place that day, and she'd been put off several times. And she was supposed to move in that day, and apparently there were some plumbing problems, and Pat wasn't going to be able to move that it looked like that day. Pat had been living at Haven House for about 5 months with her 2 daughters. She was a recovering addict, kind of a difficult case. Well, over the course of that day, we probably had about 10, 12 calls about Pat. Pat. I was getting kind of tired of Pat. And I had met Pat, but I didn't really like Pat. I did actually feel a strange affiliation with the contractors and the staff down at Morgan Place. And I felt quite certain that we all were in huge agreement that Pat really just needed to simmer down and be grateful that she wasn't on the streets. And that Liz was clearly the person that needed to muzzle Pat. She was the executive director, she needed to handle it. So, after about a dozen calls, it was close to the end of the day, a woman shows up at the door of our little attic executive offices. She looks furious and dangerous. I did not need to be introduced. I knew this was Pat. I wanted to stay and I wanted to flee It was kind of like watching an episode of Desperate Housewives, where you are both fascinated and deeply uncomfortable. But in this case, I was in such close proximity, I knew I could get my ass kicked. But it was such a great opportunity because it was my very first day. So I could watch the master, Liz, handle the situation. So I scooted my chair back to a safe distance to watch Liz handle it. I was waiting for the smackdown. And Liz said, "Hi, Pat. Come on in. Sit down." And she patted the chair. And Pat came in and she sat down. And Liz said, "You must be so frustrated. You have had such a bad day." I was like, this is not what I expected. And in 16 years, I will not forget the look on Pat's face. The look of deep relief that someone was listening to her. And she said, I am so frustrated. I took the day off work. I took the girls out of school today to switch their schools. I cannot stay one more day in this shelter, and I cannot tell the girls that they have to. And Liz looked at her and she said, "No, you can't. So, what are we gonna do?" She thought for a minute and she said, "You could camp. You could camp in that apartment. It's just the plumbing. Yeah. I think maybe you could use the bathrooms in the apartment across the hall, couldn't you? Yeah. You wouldn't mind, would you, Pat? You know, it's camping." Liz used to be a Girl Scout. She was a mad Girl Scout. "Yeah, you should even make s'mores. Yeah, this will be fun, won't it?" Pat looked at her in complete disbelief, in total incredulous joy, and she said, "We could camp. We could camp. Yes, we could." And Pat and her daughters moved out, and they camped in their apartment that night. And the next day, their plumbing was fixed. And so on my very first day at ForKids, I watched my boss break about a dozen rules. And instantly, because of my camera, the statute of limitations is completely over on all those rules. And ForKids does not break rules. City of Norfolk. Follow all rules. But I think most importantly, whereas that newly minted Arthur Anderson grad saw a homeless addict who really didn't have the right, who just ought to be grateful and didn't have the right for any of her emotions, and didn't have the right really for anything other than to just take what we gave her. Liz saw a complete human. She saw a working mom who took the day off and couldn't take the day off again for another week. She saw a mother who didn't want to disappoint her daughters again. She saw a woman who had lived in a shelter for 5 months and wanted the dignity of a home of her own. 16 years later, Pat is clean, drug-free for 16 and a half years. She is full-time employed at a job she loves. She is the proud mom of 2 beautiful grown-up adult daughters and a brand new baby grandson. Most importantly to me, she is, and I'm so proud to say, a very good friend. That is my story, and I'm very grateful for Liz and Pat for giving it to me. Thanks.